want to welcome you guys today to the next episode of the New Hollywood Podcast, where we focus on the top names in business, content creators, celebrities, models, people in fashion, people with great stories that move to Los Angeles and have an amazing story to tell. Today we have Travis Lubinsky. You probably recognize him from being on TV on MTV's Real World, San Diego. He's also been on The Profit. He started his first business around 1920 and he made over $1 million there. Travis is an all-around amazing guy. He's an e-commerce specialist. He's worked with big names like Paris Hilton, WWE. He's currently doing some projects with Star Wars and Marcus Lemonis, which is really cool stuff. So thank you for coming on the show today, Trav.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm really excited.
So where I like to start off with everybody is kind of where they started off. I know your parents are from South Africa. You grew up in the OC. How did you go from being like that quintessential guy that plays football in the OC to San Diego State to launching your own business and deciding that you don't want to work for anyone?
That's a good question. Yeah, like you mentioned, my family is from South Africa and I'm the first generation American. So my dad moved here with my brothers, and you know, there was a lot of hard times when you move into a new country. There's a land of opportunity, but finding your way is not as easy as some people think. So I watched my dad struggle for the early parts of my childhood to get our family a roof over their head and everything that we needed to have a chance and be successful. I grew up in Orange County, very fortunate place to grow up around action sports and the era where people were starting a lot of clothing lines. So I grew interest from a young age of getting into branding and one day owning my own brand. So, you know, through growing up in Orange County and seeing my dad's work ethic, I wanted to do something at a young age. So I started interning at clothing lines and working with them to promote what they were doing on, you know, I think it was middle school, local campuses, and just kind of getting my friends involved in that movement. So early on, I just had a passion for branding and getting involved with clothing.
So were you selling clothing back in like high school and middle school?
Yeah, so my older brother, Brad, is friends with a group of guys that started LRG, called Lifted Research Group. And when I was like 15, 16 years old, they were sending me to school with flyers to promote their brand. And I would have like sales at my parents' house and have all my friends come over and they would be buying t-shirts off the ground for like $10, $15 that my brother's friends were screen printing. And that brand eventually grew to become a multi-$100 million company. And the founder ended up passing away a few years back, but they had a wild ride and they're still around today.
Well, that's kind of trippy because I remember seeing that when I was in high school in different retail stores or just local malls.
Yeah. And they were really grassroots, and I wouldn't say they were the first people to do streetwear because there was FUBU and other things like it. But they were counterculture, and they had that whole audience of young kids in Orange County that adopted their style and their trends, and it eventually just grew outside of Southern California.
Well, that's what I find really interesting is like, you know, I'm from Boston, Massachusetts. I know a lot of people from the Midwest and the South. California culture influences not only the whole country, but the whole world. You know, there's Hollister stores, PacSun stores all over the nation. So you're naturally in tune with what people want to be. You know, the quintessential version of America that people in Europe and Asia see is Southern California.
Totally.
How did you go from like, you know, just being part of that culture and then figuring out how can I make that culture of people that live in the OC like me or live in LA or San Diego and take it to a national level like you did with Console and your other brands at Flex?
Yeah, so you mentioned Console, which was a screen printing company that I started when I was 19 years old. I went to San Diego State University. I was exposed to San Diego through those guys at LRG, and they took me down there for an event one time. And I remember thinking, if I go to college, I want to go to San Diego State. So I was exposed to it at a younger age, and it was the only school I applied for. And when I got into San Diego State, I decided right away I wanted to join a fraternity. And when I was joining a fraternity, I wanted to have some value. So I started handing out free clothes. So I was going to all the different fraternity houses my first week of school with a backpack and handing all the executive members of these fraternities clothing. And they're like, oh, you're the clothing guy from Orange County. I'm like, yeah. So I kind of made that reputation for myself right away. And in my first year of joining a fraternity, which was Sigma Chi at San Diego State University, everyone kind of looked at me to where do we get our shirts made? And I found a local screen printer and had a horrible experience with it. And I was like, man, I can't believe there isn't a printing company in San Diego that designs cool shirts for fraternities and sororities and prints them at an affordable price. So obviously with my entrepreneurial spirit, I said, I'm buying my own screen press and I'm doing this myself. So I started designing shirts with my friend and taking him to other fraternities and sororities and saying, will you buy this shirt for $10, knowing that I can make it for $6. So I basically started printing t-shirts out of the kitchen, like straight up drying shirts in the oven, and eventually got a warehouse down the street when I was a sophomore. And I started printing for all the fraternities and sororities. I got into collegiate licensing so that I could do it legitimately, which opened the doors into a lot of different things. So I got into artist licensing. I got into making clothing for corporate companies. And as that business grew, I just learned more and more about owning my own business, and I just did it out of a passion and for fun. And before I knew it, the company lasted 9 years and we had made over 100,000 t-shirts. We've worked with some of the biggest artists and companies in the world. We printed shirts for Facebook. We work with Toyota. And like you mentioned, we did a lot of licensing with companies like WWE and artists like Paris Hilton. So I got a lot of experience helping other people find a solution for sourcing, manufacturing, and selling product. So after doing that for a long time, I was like, how do I do this for myself? And how do I get into owning my own brand or my own property? And I was at a point where I was already going overseas, trying to figure out how to import goods to save money for my printing company. And my friends brought me this idea and they're like, yo, check out this watch. And I saw this interchangeable rubber watch that was, really cheap and not that well done, but a really good concept. And I said, let me try and make this watch. So we created a watch and it's called Flex. And that's the company you're speaking of that eventually, that company lasted 7 years and it overtook the popularity of my printing company and demanded more of my time. And I took a look at these two businesses and said, one of them, I'm drop shipping products from China and making money in my sleep. And the other one, I'm in a warehouse till 12 o'clock at night folding shirts, getting yelled at by random clients. And I was like, I just don't want to do this anymore. I'd built a business, but I'd become a slave to that business. And I was a key part of that company's operation. So I made the decision to start outsourcing all manufacturing. I shut down my warehouse and I was living in San Diego and I said, how do I grow a brand? And my first thought was move to LA. So that's kind of what brought me here.
I mean, a couple of things were really key. Like when you moved down there, you knew that most people don't think of people as multiple things. So you just chose to embrace being that clothing guy, which is really trippy. Now, this is my question for you. Like when I started my first business, and a lot of people I know, you learn by trial and error. There's no real books of exactly how it was done. And you mentioned a couple of times about licensing for collegiate stuff, which I assume was the fraternities letters, which are owned by national corporations, as well as other branding. How did you learn about the licensing stuff? Did you know that you needed to file paperwork for that, or did you get hit the first time? Because usually it's by trial and error. Once you get hit is when you learn that you need to pay for licensing.
Yeah, that's a great question. Initially we got notified that we needed to have licenses to print those shirts that we were printing. So instead of being shady about it, I just went about it and I learned what we needed and I got all the certifications and I did the factory audits and got all the permits that we needed to get and eventually made myself legitimate. So
that's amazing. And the other thing that you mentioned was that you're physically screen printing yourself.
Yeah.
That's actually kind of backbreaking labor because you're manually lifting up that screen, moving each t-shirt.
Totally. I mean, we got to a point where the business, we had automated presses that were printing. So we were loading and unloading them, but they were spitting out hundreds of shirts an hour out the end of the dryer. So if I wasn't doing sales or working on accounting, I would go fold t-shirts in the back till late at night just so that we could get orders out because we're printing at such a high volume. You essentially just need manual labor and it's hard to get people to want to work and fold t-shirts between the hours of 7 at night and 12 a.m. People want to go home. So
especially in America.
Yeah, it gets stuck on the guy who owns the factory. And it's with all the labor laws and everything that you have to abide by and minimum wage, it becomes so expensive to pay your employees to work overtime. And I couldn't justify a night shift because I didn't have enough business for that. So eventually I was like, this is just wearing on me. I'll just outsource this and make it someone else's problem.
Now, during this whole time, you're still in school. How did you balance having like a workload or a business load? Like I remember in my undergrad, I barely went to class. So I was like, if I don't study, I'll be a C+ student and I'm fine with that as long as I'm building my business.
Yeah. I mean, it was a challenge. I went to business school in San Diego, and a lot of what I was doing was practical business application of things I was learning in the classroom. So when we'd have to do projects, I would do them based on my own company. And if I had to write a business plan, I wrote it for my own company. So a lot of the opportunities that I got were born out of the program at San Diego State, where they were making me take classes and create these business plans. And I was like, I'll just do it for myself, and immediately put it into use.
All right. And just knowing you're one of those guys that stays really busy. I feel like you're probably involved with like the executive leadership of your fraternity and Rush as well, probably.
Yeah, for sure. During the time when I made the t-shirts, I was the recruitment chair. And then I became the social chair, which I was for a year, and then ultimately the president of that fraternity. So I served an executive seat the entire time I was there. And I was also on the ASB of the school, the Cultural Arts and Student Entertainment Board. So I threw events on campus and worked with other organizations on campus to provide entertainment, whether that was helping book artists for the school or just all around throw parties.
And that must have been also like really strategic and deliberate on your part, because all of those are opportunities for you to interface with other people that need t-shirts.
Correct.
Did you plan to do that like accurately, or was that just coincidence that just ended up?
Yeah, I mean, naturally I was attracted to the opportunity. And so, yeah, it was a no-brainer to ultimately control those budgets or have a say in who we were working with or who was printing the shirts. But yeah, towards the end, I was putting orders into myself.
Now, one of the things that you mentioned was that, your business was subscribing to these large clients like Facebook, the WWE, Paris Hilton at her heyday, because at that point, Paris is the biggest star in the world with all the reality shows around her. Kim Kardashian was still her assistant at that point. Mm-hmm. How do you go from having guaranteed money? It's pretty much like a salary because you have purchase orders coming in every month. You're still at the behest of those clients, to wanting to launch your own brand. What was that catalyst that made you decide that, hey, I'm going to invest in myself, invest in Travis, and build out?
I thought when I started the printing company, that's what made me happy. I thought that ultimately if I achieved some number of revenue and had, a number of employees, that I would be happy. And that business made me miserable. And I hated having to work late at night and having to work extra hours on weekends. And in that fashion, I don't mind doing it now because I'm sitting in the air conditioning behind a desk doing creative work and it's fun. Then I was just a laborer to my own business. And ultimately, I wasn't financially equipped to do anything else. So I just had to make a decision to stop and start focusing on something else that made me happier. And that thing came along, and naturally, it didn't make me money for a long time, but it was my passion. And I ran the businesses parallel for 2 years, and one of them was a hobby, and the other one paid my bills. But eventually, I got to get rid of the thing that paid my bills because my hobby superseded that.
It was just the opportunity to grow that brand, or was it just the margins were that much greater on that?
Yeah, I think there was some opportunity that came across. You mentioned I was on MTV's Real World, and during that time, I had created a clothing line for one of the cast members, and that clothing line had their own special edition Flex watch. So both of those businesses got a decent amount of exposure, and one of them took off. Flex did $1 million in sales in 6 months, and I was chasing money from celebrities, and it just wasn't fun. So I had that opportunity, and I was like, what are we going to do with this? Let's seize the moment. And yeah, it was hard to shut down my printing company after 9 years. I mean, my best friends and family work for it. My own brother invested in the company. So those were hard decisions to make, but I had to do it.
Now, getting into business for yourself is something that most people never really have to plan for. They graduate college, they get a job, and then they get their paycheck every 2 weeks or weekly, depending on the job, and they just figure it out. When you're running your own business, you're pretty much the guy that does everything from the legal, the operations, tax filings, paying out everybody, and you're the last one to eat. Did you have any mentors that kind of guided you through the process, and what was some good advice that people could take away?
Yeah, man, it's another great question. I mean, there's times where you can't pay yourself, right? and you don't know who to turn to. So out of desperation, sometimes you reach out to other people and try and get mentors and learn. And I was fortunate enough to get a hold of Damon John, and I started working with Damon and talking through some opportunities in the licensing space for my watch company. And that's kind of what gave me the opportunity to really take a step back and say all this knowledge and expertise that I've learned over the years from my printing company can be applied to this new thing I'm doing. And that was ultimately what I learned, is that you don't actually fail in life. You just kind of fail forward. And you can use everything you've done in the past and your experience and your expertise and apply it to what you're doing today. And I think that's the most important thing I've learned from anyone, is just taking all of your past experiences and making decisions based on intuition and data, knowing what's going to happen and making a decision knowing that if I have to commit to, like you mentioned, Disney at a royalty, like you're not just going to commit to a minimum guarantee with a company like that large without thinking through all of your past experiences and what you've done in sales in those different verticals and how those things can ultimately amass to more success, right? So I've learned that we have to draw from past experiences, and that was a huge thing that I finally did, and I applied it to my life, and I saw a huge change.
No, that's amazing. Question in regards to that is, how do you go about getting a hold of somebody that's as high profile as Damon John?
Yeah, well, it was the first season of Shark Tank, and Damon was starting his own agency called Shark Branding, and they offered marketing and licensing services to up-and-coming brands. So I figured the best thing I could do was be an up-and-coming brand and tell them I was interested in licensing. So that was it. I had an opportunity to meet someone that worked for Shark Branding, and I told them I'm very interested in doing this. And they said, okay, fly to New York on Monday. And I said, cool, I'll be there on Monday. And it was like Thursday, and I was in Las Vegas. So I went home after the trade show, which was a Thursday, did laundry, packed my bags, and booked my trip, and went to New York. And I showed up at the Empire State Building at 8 a.m. and emailed them and said, hey, I'm here. And they came down an hour later and grabbed me. And we walked upstairs, and we had a 2-hour meeting, and then we ended up doing a deal, and he mentored me for a full year. And he showed me how to do licensing and all sorts of amazing things.
Now that's a trip, because you're in Vegas, you go back, you don't really even have a guaranteed meeting with the guy, and you flew out. That's really taking a big risk. How did you get so comfortable taking these massive risks? Because my view of entrepreneurship has always been, what are you willing to do that the competition isn't? That's really what defines a real entrepreneur from the rest, because most people don't want to risk losing anything. And, taking that flight is a lot of money. Taking all these little risks, being at those trade shows, is nothing's guaranteed.
No, and I think, I definitely had a point of contact there and was told to come out there. So it's not like I just showed up in New York. But even like you said, going to Vegas the week before, we spent thousands of dollars and there was zero return on investment. So we took a huge leap of faith, and then we were like devastated. And I was like, I literally have to do something that's going to make up for this money we just lost, And in that mindset, I didn't even think about it. I was like, oh, here's an opportunity. Finally, I have a lead. And I went. And so that was it, And I just put myself out there. I stood there at that trade show for 3 days. And it wasn't until I was cleaning up after the show that I met someone that worked there. And I already did my research and knew everything. And I was like, oh, you're with Shark Branding? You guys are doing Shark Tank? I know all about Damon. I know all about FUBU. I just broke down some knowledge and then told her, like, let's set up a meeting for next week. And she said, cool. So, basically just do that all the time still, just meet people. And if there's an opportunity and it aligns with what I'm doing, I just go for it.
I think that's what the cutting edge for you is the fact that you're willing to go for it and see if it becomes something or if it doesn't.
Yeah.
Now, something that's interesting that most people probably don't realize is when you have brands like Disney, you have like MLB teams, everything's tied to a purchase order. So most people are thinking that, oh, he's not even taking any risk because he already has the money guaranteed. How does that process kind of work for people that don't really understand it or are thinking about getting into that game? And then secondly, how important is it to figure out like the right financing or credit solutions?
Cool. Yeah. The process is not that easy of a process. Number one, you have to apply. And once your application gets approved, you essentially go through an audit, and they go to all your factories and they look at your business and the health of your business and your creditors. And they really look at if you're a good fit for someone who can actually sell the product and that's reliable, right? And use reliable factories and reliable means to sell the product, and the values of the company align. So that's number one. Once you get through those things, then there's financial obligations, there's minimum guarantees that you have to pay, there's upfronts in many scenarios. And then you have to pay to design product, develop product, sample product, and you will go through rounds and rounds of that stuff. So, as an entrepreneur, it's not that easy to do product development in the first place. So you need to make sure that you have a budget for product development in place and a marketing budget in place that is enough money to market and successfully sell enough product to hit those minimum guarantees. And you have to go backwards from everything. Like, how much are the factory audits going to cost? How much is the development of this going to cost? How much is the sampling going to cost? How much is the inventory going to cost? And once you figure all those things out, you know how much you have to sell. And once you figure out how much you have to sell, you can say, okay, to acquire this many customers, we're going to have to reach X amount of people, and we'll need X amount of dollars for marketing. And if you can really map that out for any sound investor and say, here's our forecast, here's our minimum guarantees, here's what we're going to buy, you can get funding for it, and you can be wildly successful. And so I think the thing is to package it all and then take it to your trusted financial advisor or an investor or anyone that helps you with finance.
Okay, that's very, very insightful. That's something that most people never really learn about business is you still have to figure out a way to back things up, and then your backup plan has to have another backup plan.
Totally. And I think in licensing specifically, you either hit it or you don't. So it's like one of those things where you have to be successful. You have no choice. And again, like, you have an opportunity to sell one of the biggest licenses in the world. You're guaranteeing you're going to sell it. You got to figure out how to sell it. So you can't put yourself in a position. There is no plan B is basically what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Plan B is losing money and failing, So you have to succeed.
So we're both in our early 30s. And one thing that I've noticed in advent of change is when we were growing up, everything was retail. I'd go on Amazon or Barnes & Noble pretty much just to buy books. Now, what was the split of your business originally between retail presence and e-commerce? And then where is it now, and where do you project that going in like the next 5 years?
So when I started my business, my printing business, it was 100% B2B. There was no online business. And when I started my watch company, that was my first e-commerce store. And we had a lot of success early on in e-commerce. And that was essentially a lane that I just wanted to experiment in and figure out how to essentially cut out the retailers. But with all the marketing exposure we got, the retailers were the ones cutting the checks. And they said, hey, we'll order, like you said, they'll give you a PO, and money in hand is better than trying to sell product online. So we essentially started giving all of our product that we had for online to our retailers and trying to please our retailers. So a large percentage of our business was in retail. And I would say like 70% of all the money coming in was in retail. And it got to a point where it became 50-50. And then we made a decision, should we just pull out of retail and go direct to consumer? And for the most part, we have. And about 90% of our business is direct to consumer and is sold online. So it went from like 20-30% to 90% over 4 or 5 years.
And then what I think a lot of people don't realize is when you sell to a retailer, it's a completely different pricing structure. Could you go into a little bit of the difference between what you make when you sell it consumer direct versus when you sell it to a retailer?
Yeah, when you're going to a retailer, they want to buy it for a wholesale price, which means usually less than half of what the retail price is. So if you're selling a watch for $40, they want to buy it for $20 or less, landed with packaging on the shelf, so that they could sell it and make a margin on it. So they take 50% of your margin because they're your store, they're your distribution. So if you can figure out how to bypass that, you get to keep that margin for yourself and you can sell it for full retail. So it is good because it's a volume play and retailers can commit to buying a large amount of product. But these days, not a lot of retailers can. And so you're finding that brands are born online and they market and promote themselves on social media. And that's basically what they do, because brick and mortar, although it's not dying, it's changing, you know?
Yeah, it's an experiential experience. You go in there if you want to feel something, see what it actually looks like. Mm-hmm. But a trend that I've noticed from what I've been hearing is people like to go into retail stores, sample, play around with the product, and then go home and buy it on Amazon.
Totally. And there's apps with artificial intelligence that you just kind of scan and it tells you where to buy it for the best discount, you know? And Amazon's moving towards that. So these stores are going to become more of connection points for retailers like Amazon. And they'll still serve a purpose for people to come in and touch and feel and return and exchange. But even those experiences will be connected to an online experience.
Now, you're a master of like the technical way of like retargeting and recapturing these audiences because consumers do shop around. What are some actionable steps that you would give to somebody that's creating their first online e-commerce shop of how they go about from just an idea to actually enacting it? Like, where do they try and build the site? Do they use like a ClickFunnels type of program, and how do they learn how to mitigate their risk?
Yeah. So I've had a lot of my experience selling direct to consumer on Shopify, but I have used Magento and I have used ClickFunnels. And that's typically where you start, is after you have a product, of course, that you want to sell, is building your website and creating that online presence. If you're trying to build a robust e-commerce store with hundreds of SKUs and sell directly to a consumer, I think the quickest thing you can do is set up a Shopify store, enlist the help of a graphic designer, get a basic template up and running, and then continue to work on that and optimize it as you see traffic. The number one thing is traffic. If you can bring people to a website, you could pretty much figure out how to make them buy eventually. With enough data and enough insights, you could say, change the colors of these buttons, change the layout of this page, move things around until it works, right? But the number one thing is traffic. So how do you get started? You really have to create awareness. And these days, it has to have some form of virality to it. You have to create a story and you have to share that story. So if you can create a short brand video that explains that story and then leverage, your friends who have following or influencers you may know in your network, or just people in general, bloggers who can share your story, going on a podcast, for instance, then you take that story and you share it and distribute it to an audience, and then you come in and you sell them. So through utilizing pixel tracking on a website, when someone visits your store, you have the ability to serve them ads. And if you get their email address through either a pop-up or a checkout process, you have the ability to send them emails. So what does that communication look like? And how do you have a one-to-one conversation with someone and encourage them to buy without being too pushy? And you have to give them value, right? So your question was, what are some good ways and tactics? I mean, build a solid website and definitely find as many sources as possible to drive traffic, because from there, you can target those people all over the internet. You can use audience networks through Facebook. You can use Facebook retargeting. You can use Google retargeting, YouTube retargeting, and you can hit people all over the internet as long as you're giving them a consistent offer that's getting increasingly better and better and better. Then those ads will continue to perform, and you can just continue to optimize your web experience and tell that story. And eventually you just feed that story with more and more content. And it's a content game. And it's a quality and a quantity game. You got to put out a lot of good content.
Now, with the optimization using all those programs that you're talking about, you obviously probably didn't learn that in school. The data gives you some good insights into it. What are some other tools that people can look at online or read up on or get books on to learn some of the intricacies of how to optimize that to the best of their abilities?
I think YouTube is probably the best resource because a lot of people have gone through similar experiences in starting businesses and they like to share their success of what they've done. I mean, I still watch Russell Brunson from ClickFunnels. I've met with him. I've worked with him. I've built funnels with him. But he still gives a lot of good insight and knowledge into how to do things. So you still listen to mentors and your peers and just look to the thought provokers of that industry.
Yeah, something that a lot of people are having debates around is currently a lot of people are saying you don't necessarily need school. You can use things like the internet, YouTube to teach yourself as opposed to just having either direct mentors and stuff like that. How real do you think something like that is?
I think it's real if you're trying to learn a specific skill set and master something, but you can't replace what you learn through social interaction and networking and meeting people in real life. I wouldn't skip college. It was the foundation of how I built my business, but that doesn't mean if I knew I wanted to do e-commerce when I was 19, I would have just started studying e-commerce and been fine. So all the things that I've learned up to this time, they don't directly affect my e-commerce ability, but they affect my ability to network and meet people and close deals because I've been doing that through a school system or through some sort of structure already. And it kind of just turned into life, So it just depends on what experience you have in school. If you just go to school and learn information, you could just learn information online. But if you're going to experience college and you're going to meet people and network and take advantage of the community around your college and campus and do things like promote or throw events or start businesses, it's amazing. It's a great place to learn and fail.
Now, one of the things that you touched on was the first people that buy anything from anyone are their friends, their family, siblings, or just people that they encounter. I can't agree more with that statement because from everything from Forza, the clothing brand that I ran, to any of my talent management businesses, a lot of my initial clients or people that I worked with were friends and family. Now, there's a lot of debate around if people should be posting their businesses on their personal pages more. And I know you're kind of like me, whereas our businesses are an intricate part of who we are as people. So I post about the businesses that I'm involved with. I post about my podcast. I post about pretty much everything that I do on my socials.
Yeah.
Can you tell people a little bit more? Because I think the way that you've ironed it out to having like a color scheme and a pattern for like your personal brand and how that ties into your business, how important is it to have a personal brand that feeds your business?
I think it's important. I think people buy from a person. So if you're going to spend all this effort creating a brand or a business, you should brand yourself. And like you said, it's okay to have a content plan or an editorial calendar for yourself that makes sure you're promoting those things like your businesses on your own social, because that makes it authentic, that makes it real. And then when people see it, they're like, oh, I'm buying from this person, not this brand that no one knows. So I definitely try to make sure that my personal social media has pieces of all the brands and that it all ties together. And so that if you see watches or shoes on my page, it looks cohesive with a photo of me, right? So that it all flows together. And ultimately, these days, your Instagram and your website, it's what people judge you on. So just make it look fresh and a representation of who you are. And I can't stress the importance of a personal brand. How do you want people to perceive you? From everything you do, the way you cut your hair, the way you dress, everything you do. So portray that on your social media too. And people will essentially accept who you are because you're showing them the person that you want to be. So as an entrepreneur who has a podcast, who manages celebrity clients, that actually gives you credibility and will allow people who are trying to figure out who you are that you're legit. So why not just showcase that in a way that's legit? It's basically how I think of it. Why not use your personal social media to promote everything you're doing in a seamless way?
And with the Flex brand, you're able to incorporate a lot of the stuff about who you are as a person directly into your brand story. So the brand story and your story are very aligned.
Correct.
You personally do a lot of charity work. You personally are from Southern California and are aligned with a lot of like surf and action sports just because naturally you learned how to surf when you were younger. I see you skating on your Instagram story all the time throughout like Hollywood Boulevard. And all of that kind of just feeds one into the other.
Yeah, totally. And it's all part of it. If I'm running a lifestyle brand that's Southern California based and I'm not living that lifestyle, it's not real. So it's exactly, you hit it on the head. And everything that I market and promote is part of my lifestyle. So it all makes sense.
Now, one of the things that you touched on earlier in our conversation, one of the things I think is very important for entrepreneurs is it's not just about the wins. A lot of people love to talk about the wins. It's really about those failures, the lessons that you learn. What are a couple of like 2 big failures that you've experienced running your own businesses? What are the lessons that you kind of took away to prevent those from happening?
Yeah. So when I had a printing company, I started a promotional modeling company in San Diego. And
great for the dating life?
No, not so great. No, it was good for my need, which was have fashion shows and promote my products at local venues. So I always had an ulterior motive. So I started a company that didn't necessarily need to exist, if that makes any sense. So I started a company out of what I thought would be a need for my brands to be able to enter into the nightlife scene and be able to host events and do fashion shows. But that whole business got me sidetracked and took away from what I was trying to be doing, because from throwing fashion shows and events and putting my brand on in the forefront of those shows, I learned that now I'm booking models, dealing with venues, dealing with promoters, dealing with buses and transportation, and doing all the things that require to throw an event, right? So I basically became a promoter, and I wasn't focused as much on my day-to-day business because I was worried about throwing those events. And I basically figured out that if I stopped throwing the events and I just sponsored them, that I could have the same visibility, a lot less liability, and in many times get more exposure. So I learned that outsourcing is key. And I started outsourcing the promotions of, the events and the model hiring and all those things. And I realized I didn't even need this company. My brands could go direct to a modeling agency. My brands could go direct to a nightclub. And when you don't have a brand that's built a reputation, you think you have to do something else to justify your need to be there, if that makes sense, instead of just focusing on the value that you have, which was, let me just provide a cool experience and activate my brand. So I don't know if I answered your question directly, but it's like I got caught up in doing a bunch of nightlife stuff when I was trying to run a watch company. You know what I mean?
It's the problem that a lot of young entrepreneurs have, is that their brand definition of who they are and what their business does is so broad. I have a fashion company, but it's also a record label. Exactly. And it's a common problem that a lot of people understand because, there's different verticals that can massage each other. But unless you're very specified on your exact niche and what you do, you really can't thrive. You're just going to survive, and it's going to lower your operational capacity.
There you go. You hit it on the head. So I was all of a sudden running a promotional and modeling company and booking like events at, San Diego Convention Center for promo models. And I was like, I just wanted to put my products on models in nightlife, So when I got back to really focusing on my business and what I was doing with my printing company and my watch company, I realized that it's probably a good idea to outsource the printing too. And that's really when I started like realizing that I could let go of certain things. I didn't have to own the manufacturing. I didn't have to print my own t-shirts or source my own product. I could hire someone to deal with that for me. And I didn't realize that at a young age. I was like, we have to hire everyone and do everything. And it's like, no, you don't. Nowadays, it's like everyone talks about drop shipping and outsourcing, and it's like praised. Like the less you work, the cooler you are, But back then it was like, let's work 18-hour days and do as much as we can. And it's like, that's not necessarily working smarter, No,
I work with some of the most high profile, like Fortune 500 companies, some of the biggest thought leaders in the world. And I've lectured on stages with, people that make between 8 to 10 figures annually. And the biggest thing that I've learned from being around a lot of these people is if you're a leader, you have to empower and hire the right people in strategic roles, trust them to do their pieces, and pay them accordingly. Because one of the things that I think that you're specifically very intelligent about is with all the businesses that you work, you found a great group of people that you work with across multiple different businesses. They know exactly the best way to communicate with you. They each take ownership of their own segment. How do you go about like figuring out what are the right people to work with? How do you vet if they're actually good at what they do versus if they just have a cool resume? Because that's a problem that a lot of people, that when they start a business, is they don't know how to vet the actual ability of someone to do that job. And then how do you make it so that there's a lifetime value to that relationship?
So first of all, I only hire people or work with people that can add value, point blank. And I have to be looking for that specific thing. So if you're an ad buyer and you're good at buying ads, I'll know within a couple days of you testing, right? So as this industry goes, if you work with a designer and they do a good job, then you keep working with them. If you work with, I'll just give another example in a different industry, but if you work with a producer and he does a good job, you're going to keep working that producer. If you work with a writer, the same thing goes in any industry. So what you have to do is trial and error, and you have to use your intuition from previous failures to figure out who's the real deal or not, and you got to cut straight to it. A lot of people want to meet and grab coffee and do dinners and come to the office and get retainers and do all sorts of stuff. But it's like, what do you actually do? Do you buy ads? Do you design? So I look at people based on their ability to produce and how that adds value to me. And over time, I have a lot of great relationships with employees, contractors, vendors, suppliers that are reliable. And that's the number one thing. And people make mistakes. So as long as those people own up to it and aren't like liars or being shady about it or making excuses, and they can right their wrong, then I respect that. And I can respect people who work hard, and I give people the benefit of the doubt as long as you're hardworking and you're honest and you can actually do what you say you're going to do. It's pretty easy for me to tell if you say you can do something and you can't, because I put a lot of pressure on people immediately, and it's real. I don't take time for people to essentially get comfortable or learn. I throw them right in the fire and I'm like, cool, you can buy ads, you start tomorrow. Let's see how you do. And that's what it's taken for me to really get through. I've had probably 50 different people work for me, and I have a solid crew of about 12 people that I work with now across multiple projects. And those people are all super reliable, and they know that I don't want to be let down because I tell them, give them the freedom to do their job, but just do your job.
Be accountable for exactly what you say you're going to do. Sounds simple enough.
And a good way of doing that is putting metrics in front of people and saying, oh, cool, you can do that. Well, then hit this goal or achieve this number. And if they can do those things, then you can just slowly continue to test and see how they do. But a lot of what I would suggest to people is figure out how someone can add value directly to you, and then find a way to add value to them. And that's ultimately what I do, is I find the best ad buyers in the world and the best influencer marketing companies in the world. And then I go to them and say, this is what I have. I have a really cool product that gives back, a website that converts. I do all the retargeting. I buy all the media. I have email marketing sequences, everything set up in an environment for you to monetize. So then you're kind of turning the table on someone and saying, here's an opportunity for us to both make money together. And I'm not the person that's a bottleneck either. It's not like my websites don't convert, or I don't have inventory of product, or I don't have assets for them to push. It's like you just come to the agreement that here's everything you need. Now do what you say you can do.
You mutually align your goals with those of others. And I really loved how you brought up the concept of giving value, because that's been a big intricacy of how I built my business. I moved out to Los Angeles, $500, an air mattress, and 2 credit cards with a $12,000 limit.
Crazy.
And figured out how to bring value to a lot of different people. And through that process, I ended up being affiliated with some very large brands, some very big celebrities. And I think that's one of those things that a lot of people don't intrinsically get, is that to get value out of someone, you have to provide value. With that said, you went on The Profit, you worked with Marcus Lemonis on that show. What a lot of people don't really know or fully understand is that you guys are legitimately business partners, and you guys collaborate and work on a lot of projects. Marcus is a thought leader across business, been worth, over hundreds of millions, and now I think $1 billion currently.
Yeah.
How do you bring value? And what are some lessons that you've learned from working with Marcus?
Yeah. So I guess to bring this to present day, I went on a TV show. I took a shot. I met Marcus and I wanted to get funding for my business. And I was in a tough spot. And Marcus saw that I had the ability to sell products direct to consumers. And he believed in what we were doing. But on the show, and to this day, he says, you guys are a sales and marketing company. You were never a watchmaker. We didn't actually make watches. We drop ship them. So through the years of learning those things, I looked at myself and I said, well, I do love Flex watches and I'm all about being the founder and the brand, but my skills can be utilized across many different things. So I told Marcus, I just want to be a part of something. Can I help you sell your shoes online? Because I saw there was opportunity where he's very heavily invested in brick and mortar and e-commerce is an afterthought. And I said, look, we can sell these shoes online just like we sell these watches. And eventually I earned his trust and he said, okay, here's another website. Here's another website. Here's another. And then all of a sudden we built a dozen websites together. We've done millions of dollars in sales and we have a really unique system in place to sell products direct to consumers. And I needed that process and system for my own business. So while building it, I said, why don't we all benefit from it and share in the success? And that's ultimately what we did. I just tried to find a way to add value to Marcus in a way that he wasn't already monetizing, and I said, I could bring monetary value to you. So give me a shot. And I did it. And so that in itself, just getting the opportunity was one thing, but then growing the businesses and launching more brands and having success, that took hard work. So that's definitely something that doesn't come easy, but when you get the opportunity, you just seize the moment and put your head down and work. And
it's the difference between who gets you in the door and what you're able to perform with is what keeps you in the door.
There you go. Good one. It's a good quote.
So to take it a little bit more light place, you really have a good attitude most of the time. What's your spirit animal?
I'm not sure. Probably a lion or a shark.
Why?
Well, I just think of people who are fierce and go-getters, and I think a lion rules the land and sharks rule the water. So
that's dope. That's pretty dope. Now, with all the projects that you're working on, how do you manage time for personal life? Because it seems like you're on the go 24/7 from 7 a.m. till when you go to bed.
Yeah, I guess I don't have a real personal life, but like you said, I really enjoy the lifestyle that surrounds these brands. So living in Southern California and doing what I love and working on these brands and getting the opportunity to work with different talent and artists, I think life has just become one big blur. It's not like I have my set time. It's like skateboarding and going to the beach could be part of a photo shoot or it could be part of a marketing campaign. So I just get to do things that I enjoy all the time.
Which is a really cool way of living life as opposed to living for the weekends.
Yeah, the only reason I like the weekends is because everyone else stops working and I can get ahead. People stop calling and emailing and it's like, cool, I can actually work now.
I think that's what's interesting about my life is I go out Monday through Friday every night and I have events and functions. And on the weekend, I pretty much just stay and redo my logistics.
Yeah.
Which is kind of a trip.
That's what you have to do, bro, to stay sane. So I guess that is my personal life, that aspect of getting ahead in life and chilling on the weekends and just being able to get focused on what I care about.
Now, what are some of the projects that you're currently working on that you're really excited about that we could share with some of the listeners? And where can they find you and connect with you online?
Yeah. So I think the two you touched on, the Flex watches and Inca shoes, the most exciting thing I'm doing is we're working with Star Wars and Disney for a collaboration.
Pretty prestigious brand.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. And we have the opportunity to market and sell the Star Wars licensed product for the next 2 years on watches and shoes. So you can find the watches on flexwatches.com and Incas on incas.com. And there's watches that match the shoes and some unique pieces in there and little Easter eggs with hidden messages. So it's been really fun to create that and work with the team over at Disney and Lucasfilms and bring something to market. And I think that's, probably the pinnacle of licensing. You can't get much higher than Disney and Star Wars. So it's been a really cool experience. And what was the last question that you asked?
Where can they find you online and connect with you?
Me personally, you could go to travislubinsky.com. It has links to all my social and contact information, everything there. You can check out my book.
Yeah, you should definitely download the book.
Yeah, definitely download the book.
Has some great lessons.
Jump in that funnel.
Jump in that funnel. Maybe check out a watch. You'll donate it to your favorite charity.
Yeah. Support a cause, buy some shoes, we'll plant a tree, whatever you got.
Yeah, you got a lot of different opportunities for people to connect with you. So I just want to thank everybody for tuning into this episode of the New Hollywood Podcast. You can find us pretty much everywhere from iTunes, Facebook, Instagram, any social platform, pretty much anywhere you can download podcasts. We're just New Hollywood. And if you can follow me personally on Instagram, Twitter, and connect with me on Facebook at Ashwin Jacob, ASHWINJACOB. Look forward to interviewing some more creative people for you guys to learn from.